वेलकम टू आवर नेशन स्टेट डायलॉग। राष्ट्र राज्य संवाद श्रृंखला में आप सबका स्वागत है। आई एम डॉक्टर गीता कोचर, moderator for today's discussion. Today we have with us a very well-known figure, Mr. Vikram Sood, currently an advisor to the Observers Research Foundation, an independent policy think tank. And prior to this, he was the head of India's premier foreign intelligence agency, the Research and Analysis Wing, R&AW. He retired after 31 years of service in March 2003. He has authored a famous book, The Unending Game, of former R&AW chief's insights into espionage, which was published in 2018. Today, it is a privilege to have him with us to discuss his the great edition and book, The Ultimate Goal, Narratives. Let me congratulate you for your new book, sir. The perfect timing of release as the world is witnessing a war of propaganda and creation of new paradigms of narratives, which define the future role of mediums. In specific, while we have for decades a very negative image of India floated across globe, now we have an open contestation on constructing and countering narratives between a risen power that is US and the rising power that is China. Before we dwell more, let me first ask you about your book. What was the idea and thought behind writing the book?
Let me go back a bit into my own history, if I may. When I was at school, we were not taught history. The Irish fathers, the brothers, thought that soon after independence, we shouldn't be teaching them history, which is not accurate, because it was going to be the British version of everything. So they didn't want young Indians to be, perhaps that's my reasoning, that they didn't want them to learn the wrong version of history or the conqueror's version of history, because there were no other books available at that time. So I went through school without knowing history. And I also didn't do geography. I opted to do French. It was fashionable. So I did French. So when I landed at college, that was the first, well, actually, even at school, one started to get some political ideas, but we were not political in that sense, because we joined college at the age of 16. Nowadays, boys and girls join at the age of 18 and 19. They have full voting rights. I cast my first vote when I was 21, or even later, because I didn't do the first time. Anyhow, so it was at college that we learned British history, we learned Indian history, and the history was naturally all about how good the Brits were and how lavish the Mughals were, and they built the Taj Mahal. And you got the idea that most of the time it was just wars and more wars between kings and feudals and so on and so forth. There was no history of the people. So I started taking a lot more interest in history. But, you had to get a job, you had to sit for these exams, and all that got left behind, and I joined service. Then we witnessed, it was during my college days, we saw 62 and 65 happen. And 71 was just a year or two before I joined R&AW. So it was when I joined the intelligence agencies, and gradually one got to know how the world actually works. And while you're in service, you just go along, try and counter it, try and do what you can. And you have limited options in intelligence agency. But this thing lingered with me throughout, that the narrative we are being given is somebody else's narrative. It is not mine. I have a heritage, I have a past, and everybody is not bothered about that, or nobody is bothered about that. So, in fact, in my last book, in my first book, there is a chapter on controlling the narratives, where I figured how, just a chapter with 8-10 pages, how the world operates that. But that was where it started. The idea that I must write a book on narratives. In fact, after the last book was released, somebody suggested to me you should do something on narratives. So that's how I began to write, research, and do this book on narratives. when we were young, we used to read books like John Gunther's book, Inside Europe, Inside Russia, Inside this, Inside that. They're all propaganda material, very well written. And then you had Life magazine, Time magazine to go to, BBC to listen to. We had only All India Radio. Doordarshan came much later, and it was infancy. So we had no story of our own to tell. From there to today is a huge jump. We couldn't handle that, and I don't know whether we can handle this today. But we have to play the game of narrative, because military power, economic power, technological power is not enough unless you can make the other guy believe that you're superior and he thinks the way you want him to think. That's the game of narratives in one sentence.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I remember my first visit to China in mid-90s, and every Chinese was asking me, "Oh, I think you don't talk in India. You just dance and sing." I mean, that was the impression, because they just know about Raj Kapoor, and I was like, "Come on, we are humans. We talk normally." So I'm sure. Yeah.
Carry on.
No, so I fully agree. I mean, there is a narrative which is floated where people project you something which you can't, talk about. And how many people are you going to change? You really need to make them understand your story.
Yeah.
But having said that, we all know. Yes.
Bolo?
Please, yes, tell me.
Now, I was saying that, the BBC's talk shot used to be cattle on the street.
Yes.
With the caption, Hindus worship the cow.
Yes.
The beggar, things like that, poverty and Taj Mahal. That's all. That was India.
Yes.
And it used to hurt. It used to hurt. We're doing much better than that. So ye log yahi dikhate hain.
Yeah. Well, that was the same narrative I saw in China also. I mean, they say, "Oh, the cow comes and you stop your car and you never move." I said, there is a different feeling for us. It is not just about cow. It's about all animals.
Human beings,
we have
animals,
a different
all
kind
living
of
beings.
sense. Yeah. Yes.
So
anyway, I mean, we all know that narratives are not necessarily truth. So, but in your view, what derives the reason for floating a certain narrative?
It's the game of power. It's simple game of power. I want to convince the other person that I am better than him, I'm stronger than him in every sphere, not just military economics or technology. In fact, it's more enduring, more pertinent to give the impression of overall superiority in arts, literature, culture, everything. You want to get the Nobel Prize. I'm not denigrating the prize, but look at the way it is organized and how many Asians have got it. It's always that side. Maybe it is how it is, but it makes you wonder. This game of superiority is played not just through guns and butter. It's played through this is the more enduring, the more invidious way of making you feel inferior, making you feel that I must go. They are the go-to guys. We must go to them. We must continue to listen to BBC. There again, one learned later on how invidious BBC could be, how mischievous they could be with their storytelling, or Reuters. Reuters will always call an attack on Indian troops by gunmen, never terrorists. But they never described the Al Qaeda bombers in 2001 as knife wielding gentlemen, knife wielding tourists. They call them terrorists. Straight and simple. It is the act of terror is differently defined for me and for you. So, act of power is differently defined for you and me. The description of nationalism is different for you and me. My nationalism is good. My ideals are good. they're better than your nationalism and your idealism. In fact, I've said in my book, there's a whole chapter on how the imperial powers used Muslim Brotherhood to keep nationalisms in the Middle East down. So they still do that.
Mm.
And but if you talk about Indian nationalism, it's immediately transferred into Hindu nationalism. It's immediately transferred into Hindu majoritarianism. I mean, Hindus are the majority in this country. You can't help it. But that doesn't translate that there is no such thing as Indian nationalism. Of course there is. But you don't want to say it. Because that nationalism, therefore, is a threat in many ways. You know, Make in India is actually a threat to the Western economic interests. So that's part of our nationalism, but it is a threat.
Now I think Atmanirbhar will also become another threat to them.
Yes. Yeah. We are 1.3 billion. They need the market, Baba. They need the resources. They don't need competition from us.
True. So, I mean, narrative building and propagating is a very old tool in the hands of the state and party, and especially if we see China as a case, because I have put more on China. What do you feel has changed over the decades? I mean, in particular, when we talk of Wolf War diplomacy or see the war of words between US and China, what seems to be different now? I mean, of course, we're talking about different kind of narrative of terrorism and things like that. But overall, I think the kind of propaganda is a little different now considered to earlier. Do you see that change? And if so, what?
I think yeah, it's probably a result of globalization. The previous, let's say the Mao period and just after that, even Deng's early period, China was a closed society. So their propaganda was normally among themselves, to their own people. The greatness of the CCP and so on and so forth. Greatness of Mao, whoever. But now they've opened out. So they are in competition with the world. And they have to compete not only for their own people's attention, but also give an image outside. Like you would know best the image that they are a peaceful, China's rise will be a peaceful rise. But it doesn't seem to be working though, and Global Times is not helping them. I think their narrative is going all awry because he is doing the Wolf War diplomacy. This Global Times, more than and of course their ambassadors. No, I think they have become too aggressive too soon, and narratives are not built through aggressive mudslinging. They're much more subtle, suave ways of doing it. You know, of making me actually like listening to them. If I can get your attention for what I want to drive home, that is more important than anybody else having to drum that into my ears. That is propaganda. Narratives, when I've convinced you that this is the received wisdom, that this is how we should actually be doing, that the Americans are the greatest democrats on earth, their elections are the fairest, and they, whatever line you want to adopt, they have the mightiest military power on earth. True. Have they won a war ever after 1945? No. Why not? So nobody challenges that narrative. भाई इतने powerful हो तो क्या हुआ? So this narrative will go into a makeover. The advantage which the West has is the language. I mean, the written language, which is English in the majority of the countries, that matter. Even the French are now learning English desperately. The Russians are. And the Russians bring out a much better program on TV than the Chinese do. Russia today is, I think, the Americans now beginning to see it as a threat of sorts, because the sole voice is being challenged. Who controls the media in the world? 6 or 9 media empires. So they may be corporate, they may be private, but they're American or Western. They're not going to sell the Indian story. They're not going to tell the Chinese story unless it isn't to their advantage to do it. So China, US clash on narratives is going to be an uneven clash. The Chinese may win in other spheres. They might become much stronger economically. They might become stronger in technology even, but not so much in the narratives. That will take a long time, and they'll have to learn English much more.
But I think, narratives are also getting some challenge from nationalism. I mean, in the time of social media, how do you see narratives challenge nationalism or promote nationalism in the context of India-China relations? I mean, how do you see this has impacted our relations, especially because in social media, we are having a hype of nationalism. And so the narrative building, which is being done either by any state or party, is again challenged, So there are different kinds of variations coming. How do you see that?
I think there's an advantage in this and a risk also. When you have this kind of democracy, open democracy, where anybody can say anything on the social media and get away and not be responsible, is damaging. But if there are only, which is not easy to have, just responsible free Democrats or free liberals or free ideologues who are on these social media platforms, then you have a debate. But nowadays you have game of numbers, game of who gets it in first and who does it the most, who retweets the most. That is the kind of a wave being created in the minds that so and so is trending on TV, on Twitter, or whatever the term is in Facebook. I don't know, but that's how they're working. Then communications like these ultra fast, super secret communications, as they call them, end-to-end encrypted messages. In 10 minutes, you can create a riot. You put in one false story, circulated to 10 people, multiplied by 10 in every minute. And in 10 minutes, we have 100,000 people perhaps talking the same thing. So how do you control that? How does an intelligence agency predict it and control it? That's going to be the challenge for all of us. Narratives you can build. These are what I call tactical narratives. That, you create a narrative about a riot, let's say. But when you want to create a narrative about the country, the social media is not enough, because its lifespan is limited. The attention span is limited. People quickly move on to another topic soon enough, and then this is forgotten. Narratives can come only through books, so through literature, through art, through things that are lasting. I even call the narrative of the Latvians Delhi lies where you located the Russian governor's house, Governor General's or Viceroy's house, on the two sides, 2 seats of power, defense and home, north and south block, and down there, behind the grove of trees, was the Legislative Assembly. So it's not like the Capitol Hill, high on the hill. It was down there. In America, the White House is on plain ground. The Capitol Hill is a hill. So do they know the difference? In your mind, where your priorities are, who's the authority, comes from these kinds of symbolisms. So social media is going to be a big problem for everybody. And the system, let's not go into all the reasons or ethical reasons why they do it, but the effect on the common mind, people who have access to this, is quite strong and very quick. So I don't know whether anyone has had an answer yet to this. I don't know yet. How are you going to tackle this? Say, who is there going to be anybody who will say, stop it, I'm not going to have social media in my country? Can anyone in a democratic country say, no Twitter, no Facebook, no nothing?
Or maybe China with its own kind of Twitter.
Yeah, or you can have that.
Yeah. But that's more controlled and different in one sense. It's not free media. Yeah. It's not
that's 24-hour surveillance. But we don't mind surveillance by the corporate sector, really. We mind surveillance by the government. All of us become enraged if you see the government is watching you. But the corporate sector through all these is watching us much more, all the time.
Yes.
Your credit cards, your phone bills, your appointments, your locations, they know everything.
Yes.
The kind of clothes you buy, the books you read, Amazon will give you a list of what you bought 2 years ago. I don't remember, but they remember. So this is how they control. They have the information. They can share it with who they want. And when the government says, I want to watch Vikram Sood, what he's doing, then I'm going to make a lot of noise. Even though it is perhaps meant to be in my interest that I should be watched, not because I'm up to something, but there's somebody else who may be wanting to do something. So we don't want to do that. So these dual standards are perhaps a problem for ourselves.
But I mean, there's all talk about post-truth. I mean, how do you see it reshaping the new kinds of narratives around us? I mean, we're not just talking about truth as such.
Up to fake news, hai. Now we are in an era of fake news. Post-truth is a polite word.
Yes.
We don't know. You send off a WhatsApp, forward anything, you find it's all rubbish. It's all made up, and technology can put my face on any other body or and send it off. So it's frightening. Post-truth is an era of great fright to me. I don't know what's true on the newspaper. I don't know what's true on the TV channel. I don't know why some certain thing is happening when it looks absurd, but it does. Why is one case played up and not the other?
Yes, it has made our even researchers' work very tough, because we really don't know what to believe and what not to believe, and how do you collate all that?
Yeah, and you read a piece of paper. It sounds very logical, but it's not true. I've seen those people. On the net, if you go, you find a very reasonable argument. You find somebody else comes and says this is not true at all. I never happened like this. So, क्या research करेंगे हम?
Okay, so let me just put you.
Yeah.
let me just put you almost the last question. And you've been advocating about India should promote its own narrative. But how do you counter when the world promotes certain kind of narratives against India? And also, what kind of narrative should India build to project the right and positive image of India? Isn't it a task of education system? I mean, you were talking about books and literary books. That should really build the notion of feeling of community among the masses, which I think we are lacking now.
Let me be a little cynical about narratives. The world will come to us if we are economically and financially strong and united. It doesn't matter whether we are communists or democratic or anything. That's the lesson we get from China. The Europeans, I don't think, have fully given up on China. The Australians have also not given up on China. Their economic interests are tied there. So are the American interests. But for us, the advantage is that if we are able to remain our democratic credentials, which I don't think are really in danger, we have a lot of flack going around, but ultimately, I don't think democracy is in danger in India. But if we can project ourselves as a go-to country without doing anything else, that is your narrative. Come here and be happy. We are the country to go to for your business, for your investment, for your protection, anything. So that's how we can do it. And Baki, we shouldn't delve too much into the past. Our heritage is our heritage. That's for us. That's for us to remember. That's for internal consumption. That's meant to tell our own people about our past. But let's not live there. Believe me, I don't think the past is all the time very beautiful. It's quite horrible if you look at it. Historically, if you look at the past. So let's not live in the past. Take that as an example and then look ahead. What we can do to ourselves. We have many things going for us. We just got to put it together. And we're not able to do that, really. Politics gets into everything. There they have systems, massive think tanks, massive organizations that work automatically, whether it is Biden or Trump or Kennedy, or there is a parallel line going. There is a stream in which they flow. They don't go backwards, they don't go sideways. There is only a change whether you move fast or slow, or you move on the left side of the lane or the right side of the lane. But the goals, the objectives remain the same. I want to be the strongest country on earth. What should I do for it? America the greatest. We can at least try and say, be India the greatest, at least in South Asia, at least in Asia. And what should we do for that? Then the narrative comes automatically after that. Live in the present and future. Use the past. But we tend to go back to Aryabhat, we begin to go back to so-and-so, and say, well, we've discovered everything then, and now there's no more discovery to be made. Won't get us anywhere.
I mean, very well said that we have to think about present and future. And of course, I think some of the things which the world is always looking at India in terms of our culture, in terms of spiritualism, I think all the Western people have really come to hear, whether we wanted to float that narrative or not, but that existed. But anyway, thank you very much for Mr. Vikram Sood ji for these insights and very interesting discussion. A wonderful deliberation and a lot that we learned today. It was indeed a great discussion and a personal pleasure to hear. Thank you all for watching our episode. We hope to continue our conversations. Keep watching and keep learning. Thank you.
Bye-bye.